Hey, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, 3:30, Sean Kennedy joins us. We'll talk law and order with him, and we'll talk about FBI violent crime data, why it's not giving you anywhere near the truth about what's happening in America right now. Carol Markowitz joins us from the New York Post at 4 o'clock today as we discuss why are the kids not even going to school. So much truancy and a lot of ensuing crime. Carol will talk about that with us. And then Bradley Devlin is here from the American Conservative at 5:30. We talk about Speaker Mike Johnson and what is happening with all of this Ukraine funding that keeps growing out the door. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Boy, we have a lot to get to today, including the nonstop hilarity out of the mouths of people like Sheila Jackson Lee. You see, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, she was down in Texas yesterday celebrating the eclipse. She was out at a local high school and just being hysterical. And the best part about her is she's really stupid, but she speaks confidently, which is fantastic. It's always the best combination. And she was speaking confidently about science. She's kind of the Bill Nye the Science Guy of the Congress, where she pretends she knows everything. And if you just looked at her credentials, you might think, well, she probably knows something, right? You would assume it. She was an undergrad at Yale University. She went to Yale. Did you know that? Sheila Jackson Lee went to Yale. And she went to the University of Virginia Law School. So she's kind of got a great thing going in terms of just her educational background. That looks nice on her resume, those two places. She's also a member of she has sat on the House Science Committee and the House Space Committee. So she might know a thing or two about the celestial bodies outside of planet Earth. Take a listen to Sheila Jackson Lee today describing to the high school students there in Texas what was actually happening yesterday during the eclipse.
You have the energy of the moon at night, and sometimes you've heard the word full moon. And sometimes you need to take the opportunity just to come out and see a full moon is that complete rounded circle, wow, which is made up mostly of gases. And that's why the question is why.
What was that? I'm sorry. I may have missed this in high school. The moon is made up mostly of gases. It's made up mostly, although if she said glasses, it would be just as wrong, just as stupid, and just as hilarious. But she said the moon is made up mostly of gases.
A full moon is that complete rounded circle, which is made up mostly of gases. And that's why the question is why or how could we as humans live on the moon? Are the gases such that we could do that? The sun is a mighty powerful heat that is almost impossible.
Did you hear the beginning of that? She said that the moon generates energy at night. Does the moon generate energy? I realize it does have an effect on the tides.
The sun is a mighty powerful heat that is almost impossible to go near the sun.
It's almost impossible. Not completely impossible. It's almost impossible to get near the sun.
The moon is more manageable. And you will see in a moment, or not a moment, you'll see in a couple of years that NASA is going back to the moon.
Well, that was all fantastic. I feel sorry for the kids. In case you're wondering what's going on in the schools, we have some footage. We have the audio of Sheila Jackson Lee giving them an education on the gases that make up the moon. By the way, just to make sure that I had the actual science here, the atmosphere of the moon apparently has a very scant presence of any gases whatsoever. They say for most practical purposes, the moon is considered to be surrounded by a vacuum. The elevated presence of atomic and molecular particles in its vicinity compared to interplanetary medium, referred to as, quote, lunar atmosphere for scientific objectives, is negligible in comparison with the gaseous envelopes surrounding Earth and most planets of the solar system. So, she's wrong. That's a long way of saying she's wrong. It's not mostly gas. She's mostly gas. But that's not the first time Sheila Jackson Lee has done this. She's done this a million times, and we have some of her greatest hits because why not? This is such a fantastic time to. She's given us a kind of a chance to dwell on some of these great moments. Here she is talking about AR-15s and what it's like to handle them.
My bill that I've introduced dealing with the caliber weapon, I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets.
Oh my goodness.
Need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street.
She has no idea what she's even 50 caliber bullets in your run-of-the-mill AR? Yeah, no. About 5.56 or 2.23. We're not talking 50 caliber bullets. Kind of something very different. Sheila Jackson Lee, she says, it's as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. I don't even know what she's referencing. Has she ever picked up a box to move it? Maybe that's why she's unfamiliar with the weight comparisons here. Sheila Jackson Lee, at one point, said recently that the Constitution of the United States is over 400 years old. Ready?
We have lasted some 400 years operating under a Constitution that clearly defines what is constitutional and what is not. The Enforcement Act is not constitutional, but it gives us an opportunity to raise these issues. That's what freedom is. That's what the opportunity of democracy is all about.
Now, when she said that back in 2014, that's when she said that. That means, as the Free Beacon so dutifully pointed out, that the Constitution would have had to have been signed in 1614, which is quite impossible. Quite impossible, given that 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution wouldn't be signed and adopted until 1787. So she was just off by about 173 years. That's fine. It's basically a rounding error. That's Sheila Jackson Lee. She also at one point, quite recently actually, said that this was 2010, so recently enough. Sheila Jackson Lee claimed in 2010 that, quote, today we have two Vietnams.
Today we have two Vietnams, side by side, north and south, exchanging and working.
Side by side. North and South.
We may not agree with all that North Vietnam is doing, but they are living in peace. I would look for a better human rights record for North Vietnam, but they're living side by side.
What is she talking
because
about?
That was a civil war. And because the leadership of this nation did not listen to the mothers and fathers who borne the burden of 58,000 dead and did not declare victory, the mounting death, the violence continued going up and up. Rather than understanding the political nature of the war in Vietnam, we did not listen to those families.
Vietnam, as she says, reunited in July of 1976. So at the time she was speaking, 2010, that was one country she's referring to. She says, today we have two Vietnams. So she was just once again off by many years as she was making that assessment. What else has she done? Oh, I heard Chris Plant bring this up today. I had to go dig into the archive. This is a great one. Back to the moon now, or in this case, Mars. She became convinced at one point that Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on Mars. She said back in 1997, Sheila Jackson Lee, according to The Hill at the time, she was a newly elected congresswoman. She asked NASA officials whether the Mars Pathfinder had photographed the American flag that astronaut Neil Armstrong had planted on the surface of Mars. When it was pointed out that the flag in question was on the moon and not Mars, Miss Jackson Lee cited bigotry. Quote, you thought you could have fun with a black woman, member of the science committee, her then chief of staff wrote in a letter to the editor of The Hill. They said it was racist to point out that Neil Armstrong had not, in fact, planted an American flag on the surface of Mars. You ready for more? You ready for more of these? She's the best. This is why we shouldn't have term limits, by the way. Sheila Jackson Lee should stay in Congress forever. She needs to keep producing this kind of hilarity. Sheila Jackson Lee, back in 2003, demanded that catastrophic storms be given African-American names. She was tired of hurricanes being given names that sounded too white. She wanted hurricanes to be named after African-Americans. Now, remember, hurricanes are destructive forces of nature. They leave typically some degree of misery in their wake, sometimes a lot of it. Sheila Jackson Lee, her great idea was we need to name more of these storms after black people. That was her position in 2003, and she even gave us some recommendations. You ready for the recommendations? I swear to you, this is real. In July of 2003, Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a member of the NAACP and the Congressional Black Caucus, and an ardent supporter of the civil rights leadership, criticized the weather establishment for their selection of names with which to christen hurricanes, stating that, quote, all racial groups should be represented. Are there diseases she wants to name after African Americans? What is she doing? What is this? Representative Lee added that she hoped in the future storm lists, quote, would try to be inclusive of African American names, such as, quote, Keisha, Jamal, and Deshaun. she wanted a Hurricane Deshaun for equity. She was so ahead of her time. Back in 2003, now, what is that, 21 years ago, she was calling for a Hurricane Deshaun. It's only fair. What else? What else do I have from Sheila Jackson Lee? Just this past year, actually. Remember, she was running for mayor in Houston. She lost. She was urging her supporters in Houston to vote on the wrong day. The New York Post had this story at the time. Houston, we have a problem. A campaign ad for Houston mayoral candidate Representative Sheila Jackson Lee encouraged her supporters to head to the polls, but not on Election Day. A graphic in the 30-second spot tells voters to cast their ballots on or before December 7th in Jackson Lee's runoff race against Texas Democratic State Senator John Whitmire. But the election is scheduled for December 9th. They said, vote by December 7th. Any would-be voters showing up to the polling sites on December 7th would be unable to cast their ballots, as Harris County's 41 early voting centers close on December 5th, and they don't reopen until December 9th. So that's apparently extends to the way her campaigns are operated as well. And then finally, this one's fun. Sheila Jackson Lee at one point said out loud that she's only where she is in life because, well, I'll let her explain it.
But I rise today as a clear recipient of affirmative action, and particularly in higher education.
Come on.
I may have been admitted on affirmative action, both in terms of being a woman and a woman of color, but I can declare that I did not graduate on affirmative action. This is my personal story.
You think Yale's running around going, distinguished alumni, distinguished alumnus, Sheila Jackson Lee. The pride and joy of Yale, Sheila Jackson Lee. But she's not alone. Sheila Jackson Lee. We pick on Sheila Jackson Lee, but we shouldn't just pick on her. She's not alone. There's a lot of this out there. You remember this doozy? This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez discovering how a garbage disposal works.
Okay, everyone, I need your help because I just moved into this apartment a few months ago and I flipped this switch and it made that noise and it scared the daylight.
By the way, there's a spoon in there, just so she knows that some sort of metal object is actually in the garbage disposal.
Out of me. I am told this is a garbage disposal. I've never seen a garbage disposal. I never had one in any place I've ever
Just remember, as you're listening to all of this, these people are in charge.
lived. It is terrifying. I don't know what to use it for or what its purpose is. Like food scraps? Like, is this environmentally sound? I don't know. Boo! No, I'm just kidding. I think there's a piece of glass down there.
Yeah, she was figuring it out. She was navigating through that. Also, at one point, AOC was trying to figure out what the three branches of government are, and she had some Sheila Jackson Lee type trouble.
Our butts off to make sure that we take back all three chambers of Congress, all three chambers of government, the presidency, the Senate, and the House in 2020. We can't start working in 2020.
It's totally incoherent. And then finally, with regards to AOC, by the way, we have a huge list. We could barely scratch the surface here today. But here she is saying that RICO, which is, of course, what Democrats are looking to imprison Trump for in Georgia. This very recently, she said, RICO's not a crime, she told Tony Bobolinsky.
Corruption Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime. It is a category. What is the
It's the category of crimes.
And coming up, perhaps the single dumbest lawmaker on the planet. We love him. We're going to play the audio. No highlight reel of the dumbest member of Congress would be complete without good old Hank Johnson of Georgia. A sweet man. Limited brain capacity. He indicated years ago, famously, that he was concerned that if too many people stood on one side of Guam, it would flip over. And that could be a risk. Take a listen.
Yeah, my fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize.
We don't anticipate that.
I'm glad that came out in congressional testimony. Good. At least there was an expert there saying, we don't anticipate that. It was a military officer. He was like, yeah, that's not going to happen, Congressman. But underappreciated is this great Hank Johnson moment from a couple years back where he was indicating that he's very fearful that we could run out of helium. And if we run out of helium, how are comedians going to do that squeaky voice trick that everybody loves so much?
Imagine, Mr. Speaker, a world without balloons. How can we make sure that the injustice of there being no helium for comedians to get that high-pitched voice that we all hold near and dear to our hearts?
Yes, we all hold it. We all hold it so near and dear. The helium shortage scare. That's an old scare. That one's over. By the way, just I said some good news for Hank Johnson and anybody else who was worried about that. In fact, there was a recent discovery in Minnesota. Researchers, according to Live Science, just a couple weeks ago, researchers have hit on what could be the largest reserve of helium in North America at a drill site in Minnesota. Just weeks ago, a resource exploration company called Pulsar Helium has a drilling rig located just outside of Babbitt in an iron ore mining district known as the Iron Range. They said it's an outstanding result. They made a huge discovery, 2,200 feet under the ground, massive, massive supply of helium. Don't you worry, Congressman. That squeaky voice is here for us to stay. Coming up, Sean Kennedy will be here. We'll talk crime, data manipulation, and we'll do it in normal voices. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, the New York Post's Carol Markowitz joins us at 4 o'clock. Then at 5:30 from the American Conservative, Bradley Devlin is here. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Even if you think the moon is made up mostly of gas, you're welcome here. It's an open forum. In the month of March, according to Gallup, 80% of Americans said that they personally worry about crime and violence in the United States, quote, a great deal or a fair amount. Yet the media and the government keep telling us, oh, no, crime is coming down. What are you so worried about? Everything's fine. What's the truth here? Well, there's an organization, the Coalition for Law, Order, and Safety, that's been among the good people looking into this. Sean Kennedy is its executive director and joins us now. Sean, good to talk to you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me, Vince. I'm glad to be here.
So square this for us. I do keep hearing from places like the White House and various mayors, Democrats, all that. Well, no, crime is coming down. Don't you worry so much about the crime. What's actually going on?
Well, since 2020, since really May 2020, crime, particularly violence, skyrocketed. There's lots of reasons that we discussed before in the report: deprosecution, decarceration, that is emptying out the prisons, the politicization of crime and justice in America, and obviously depolicing. And all of those contributed to a huge spike in actual violent crime. And then that rise in homicides reached 40% over the combined over 2021 and 2022, or 2020, 2021. And then it declined slightly in the last year, according to the FBI, and then declined further in the last year. But we dug into the numbers, and what was so striking was the FBI isn't wholly reporting most jurisdictions' data. The data is like Swiss cheese. And so they're guessing what should be the number of homicides in a given year in a jurisdiction, and then extrapolating from that the national decline in murders or aggravated assaults or robberies. And some of the numbers are just plain wrong. They get the number for the number of robberies in Milwaukee wrong. They get the number of homicides in Baltimore wrong. And these numbers are publicly available from the police themselves.
So does that mean,
FBI,
so like in Milwaukee and Baltimore, just to use those examples specifically, is the crime higher than the FBI indicates?
Absolutely. Every single category in the last year that we saw comparing the city-level agency data to FBI reported data in this latest quarterly estimate, which is what the Biden administration is touting, it turns out almost every single one of those data points undercounted this year's data and overcounted last year's, or counted correctly last year's according to the police data. So basically they're using a baseline that shows a steeper drop than it really is. If they were using two bad baselines, you'd say, okay, well, it's just a math mistake. But conveniently, every single time, they undercount this last year's data and overcount or correctly count the previous years. So you get these massive drops that don't exist.
This is a familiar trick, by the way, for the Biden administration. They've done this in any number of subject areas. One of them is, say, inflation. They say, well, inflation's coming down from its high. Well, the high was achieved during Biden. That's when, so the worst has been during Biden. The gas prices are coming down. Yeah, from the high achieved during Biden. They make these ridiculous claims that, oh, things are improving. Yeah, you're the one on whose watch it was made so much worse. And here you've got kind of a manipulation of the data where they're trying to take credit for an improving picture that they're comparing against themselves. They set the awful record, and they're not actually even telling us the full truth, are they?
No, and even if you take their numbers at face value, which we point out in the report, there's huge errors. So many departments. San Francisco won't even report its data to the FBI until 2025 because they introduced this new system, which is sort of at the root of a lot of these problems that is too onerous for them to comply with. San Francisco isn't even reporting data to the FBI. But you can go to the San Francisco police website and get all their data right now. You can't just Google San Francisco police crime statistics, and they'll show you how many murders there were. But the FBI has no idea. And the way I analogize this, I think that's the kind of works with inflation and works with unemployment and works with all these other things, is you took us to the top of Mount Everest, and now we're at K2, the mountain next to Mount Everest, which is slightly lower, and telling us we're so much closer to the ground. I mean, that's true, but it's not really true.
And you don't get credit for that.
You're closer to the ground. Yeah, you don't get credit for that. I mean, that's sort of the problem here is if we're not using the right yardstick, if we're not measuring things correctly, we can't solve the problem.
No, not at all. Now, another piece here that I think matters is how often do we record crime at all in all of these jurisdictions? So you've got Democrat cities where you have Democrat prosecutors who are refusing to prosecute broad categories of crime. You can't say that the crime itself is down, but what you can say is the enforcement of the law certainly is.
Absolutely. And I'll use a simple and tangible example to people here in the Washington, D.C. area. Almost every jurisdiction around here has raised what we call the felony theft threshold, which is the amount of money something has to cost for you to steal it and it to be a felony, which would constitute a larceny theft under the FBI's definition of a property crime. Well, if you make that threshold, like they have in Virginia, go from $200 to $1,000, a $700 laptop is no longer a felony. And therefore, did it happen? If the police say it's a petty theft, it's a minor crime, we're not going to record it, call your insurance, and they don't record it, it didn't happen, so there was no shoplifting. That's effectively what can be happening here. And we know in previous jurisdictions, in other places in Los Angeles and elsewhere, they've caught the cops red-handed manipulating the crime stats in just that way to make their bosses look better.
Yes, and then they come along and they're like, "Hey, crime is down." Actually, no, enforcement of the law is down. In fact, our friend here, John Lott, over at the Crime Prevention Research Center, he just put out a survey. It comes out at a great time. You both have these great reports coming out. His is talking about arrest rates have plummeted, and therefore people have been less willing to report crime. So if the cops aren't even arresting people because the left is stopping that from happening, then people think, why am I going to pick up the phone to dial 911 to even make the call? I know how this ends, and it's not going to be good for me. If a criminal, comes after me for calling 911 and nobody's actually going to lock up the criminal, that's a bad story for me. So this is a vicious cycle.
And this can be very, very dangerous. We like to think about the idea of robbery and stranger rape and all these kind of crimes where that are, Law and Order SVU style, terrible, dramatized things. But most people who are robbed by other people in their neighborhood or people they know, or people who are abused or are abused by other people they know. And their unwillingness to report results in two things: further victimization of the victim, because now the victim knows the perpetrator knows they're an easy target, or alternatively, which is what the victim survey that John Lott, who does great research, is studying in that victim survey by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is also under the Justice Department, that survey points out that people say they're going to handle the problem themselves. And that's especially the case for robbery. What does that mean? They're going to handle the problem themselves. By not reporting it, they're going to deal with it. That is a recipe for lawlessness.
Well, sure. And that person may then commit some sort of crime back at the person who robbed them.
Retaliate. And we know in many of these jurisdictions that a number of the homicides are actually retaliations. They're retaliations for other crimes or for offenses or whatever reason. So we're creating more crime by not prosecuting the first crime or not even taking the report in the first place, because the victim feels like they have to take the law into their own hands.
Well, that kind of lawlessness is historically a breeding ground for gang activity and warlords and all sorts of awful outcomes that don't bring stability and peace to a community, instead bring chaos to it.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that anytime you create a culture where the authorities, there's no neutral arbiter, there's no justice, the justice of a one man trumps the justice of everyone else. And then you get into exactly that, the cycles of violence, the Hatfields and the McCoys, all this kind of gang violence, third world warlords, where people are committing their own crimes in order to avenge previous crimes. And it just starts to spiral out of control. And that's what we're asking for when there's no expectation that the people who are in charge of the justice system are doing their job. And that is what's shown in the other reports and other polls from Gallup and others, that the faith in the institutions of our justice system is at record lows right now. And the reason is because they don't trust the people to do their jobs. And in this case, unfortunately, we don't trust them to even account for how much crime there really is.
So if you were to do a survey of people who live in crime-ridden areas, historically crime-ridden areas, would you find that they think things are improving or things are a lot worse right now?
We know that they think it's worse. They're less safe than they were. They feel less safe. They feel less able and willing and trustworthy of the police. And that's sort of the interesting sort of rub here, is the left likes to say, oh, people don't trust the police because they're racist or they're terrible. But at the same time, even if we improve the police sort of, malfeasance issues, abuse of force or whatever else, but they don't trust that the police will protect them, they're not going to have trust. So it's a chicken or the egg question. Is it that they don't trust them to do their job and protect them, or is it that they think their police are going to do something bad to them personally? Either way, there's a breakdown in our justice system that needs to be fixed, and lying about the data isn't helping anyone get there.
And this idea that most cops or even half of them are somehow abusive is a lie. It's a total canard. But what the reality here is that you have cops who are making arrests, and then that guy's back on the street because doesn't have a system that supports that arrest to begin with. So as a result, people are thinking, wait, why am I going to call the cops? The guy's just going to be released in no time, even if the cop does his job perfectly.
It's absolute demoralization trickle down. At every juncture, somebody says, oh, we're not going to bother following through on that. So then eventually it gets down to the victim, and they find out that the cops aren't going to pursue it. But the cop is demoralized because they just arrested the guy because the prosecutor didn't prosecute. And the prosecutor didn't prosecute because they changed the laws that made the laws more lenient, so it wasn't worth it, and so forth and so on. And then people at the top, like the White House or governors or whatever, are like, I don't understand why these cops aren't just, locking up the criminals and getting all the bad guys off the street, even though we took away all their tools. And I don't understand. And this is the funny part, of course, is the media saying, I can't believe all these people are lying. They're so wrong. That was the kicker, was back in December, the third quarter report came out, and NBC News had the gall to say, the American people think crime is rising. They're wrong. And that was the headline. Like, they're wrong. It's not here's what's going on or whatever. No, they're wrong. They're stupid. You cannot have an opinion that differs from this statistic that we, of course, aren't going to ask tough questions about because the American people are just stupid. They have to believe what we tell them fits the narrative.
So when I see headlines that say that crime is down, and I see it all the time, these lefty outlets have been running all these headlines for months now in the lead up to the election. They say crime is down, crime is down. You're telling me, Sean Kennedy, this is a hoax.
It's not that it's a hoax. Crime may well be down relative to where it was, but crime is demonstrably up from before George Floyd.
Yeah.
But here's an important point about the crime narrative and how this fits in the timeline. Google FBI crime statistics airs and put your Google search settings to 2021, 2022. CNN, MSNBC, they will all have articles criticizing the FBI's crime data. Go forward, they will all now have data stories praising the FBI and praising the great data they produce. What changed? The FBI data is no better. In a way, it may be worse than it was even a few years ago. But what changed was the answer they got from the FBI data machine was the answer they wanted.
Right. So they claimed the FBI was covering up criminality before when it served some sort of political purpose. Now they're
well, in this
saying
case, it was that crime was rising in 2021,
yeah.
and that hurt Biden. And when it hurts Biden, then the FBI data is wrong. We can't trust these numbers, or whatever. And now that it's declining, if anyone throws cold water on the FBI crime statistics, oh, you're wrong. You have to trust the FBI. PolitiFact has a story out today saying, look at all these great FBI numbers. They prove that crime isn't skyrocketing. And I actually wrote a piece in the Washington Post in 2016 with Trump throwing cold water on PolitiFact's fact check of Trump, saying Trump had said crime was rising in 2016.
Yeah.
And it turns out he was right, and PolitiFact didn't understand how to read data. And I ended up with a Washington Post op-ed about this because it was so embarrassing that they're carrying water for whatever the narrative is. In this case, that the Obama administration had fought crime successfully, or the Ferguson effect didn't exist,
Sure.
or whatever. And now that it's in Biden's best interest, PolitiFact is out there, carrying the water once again, when in fact they should be throwing cold water all over these numbers and saying, hey, why do San Francisco and St. Louis and New Orleans, they just found out New Orleans last week, by the way, the rape numbers totally wrong. They just corrected 3 years of rape numbers. They were totally inaccurate. And they're going to fix that. So we'll make sure, we'll stay tuned that that'll be headlines on CNN and MSNBC later this week that all the data out of New Orleans or the data out of Kansas from last year or the data out of St. Louis from last year was all wrong, which we know from some of the local media, but nationally nobody ever questions the national data.
And they should. They should. And here they are, rigging data to influence elections. What do you call that? Sean Kennedy over at the Coalition for Law, Order, and Safety. Sir, thank you for your time today and your excellent work. Alan is calling in from Gambrills, line 2 today. Alan, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hi, Vince. It's always an honor to talk to you. And I just don't understand what you and everybody is complaining about, because the statistics show that crime is demonstrably lower everywhere, especially in Washington, D.C.
Isn't it amazing?
I mean, how can you have crime when you don't prosecute criminals?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
If there's no prosecutions and there's no convictions, the stats are brilliant.
I know. It's a scam. It's totally rigged because you have Dem prosecutors who are not prosecuting, and then they run out there and they say, hey, crime is down because I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing my job.
If it wasn't for double standards.
I know.
If it wasn't for double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all.
That's a great phrase. Did you come up with that?
I wish I could take credit, but the other great one, the great Chris Plan.
Oh, okay. I
give props where props are due. I didn't go to Harvard, so I give proper accreditation.
Hey, Sheila Jackson Lee went to Yale. Can you believe that? I didn't know that. I did a double take. That wasn't the first time I did a Sheila Jackson Lee double take today, by the way. I was like, where'd she go to? Yale? And that was a long time ago. That was before the standards fell off the face of the earth. Well, I guess she had good connections or something. Coming up, Carol Markowitz from the New York Post joins us. We're going to talk to her about more of these problems. How did society get like this? Well, the kids aren't even going to school anymore, and, government officials are just letting them get away with it. Carol Markowitz We'll talk about that with us in a moment.